Who the hell decided my mailbox wasn't good enough? I barked, staring at the flimsy letter taped to my front door like a pink flamingo in a lawn of roses. Screaming, "Remove this unapproved eyesore immediately!" It was the kind of note you'd expect from a high school principal, not from a group of grown adults hiding behind an HOA. Hey, I'm Michael Sanders. If you're tuning in, drop a comment below. Where in the world are you watching from? And trust me, stick around till the end because you're about to see how these HOA tyrants learned the hard way not to mess with me. Yeah, I said it. These HOA bastards got way more than they bargained for. See, this isn't just about a mailbox. That old box sitting crooked by the curb, it's more than wood and paint to me. It was my dad's masterpiece, built by hand 50 years ago when this neighborhood was nothing but dusty fields and empty lots. He was the kind of man who believed in hard work, family legacy, and that a mailbox wasn't just a box, it was a symbol. Every scratch, every nail, every faded coat of paint was a chapter of my childhood, a memory etched into that weathered wood. Losing Dad last year hit me harder than I expected. Suddenly, the mailbox was all that tied me to him. It was the last thing standing between me and the erasure of his presence from this street. So when I got that letter from Vivian Miller, the self-appointed queen of the neighborhood, I knew this was going to be a battle. But damn if I was going to back down. Vivian's been the HOA president for what feels like forever. You know the type. Rules written in stone, power trips disguised as community service, and an eye for perfection that borders on obsession. Last month it was my lawn, which apparently was not up to code because of a rogue dandelion. Now my mailbox, unapproved. Next, I half expect her to send me a citation for breathing too loudly. The day I found that letter, I was outside trimming the hedges. Vivian's eyes caught me from across the street like a hawk. She called out, "Michael, your mailbox is not in compliance with the community standards. You need to remove it immediately." Her voice was sharp, cold, but underneath I caught that little flicker of smug satisfaction, like she thought she'd already won. But here's the thing about me. I'm not the kind of guy who lets someone else dictate what holds meaning in my life. That mailbox, it's a legacy, a story, a damn monument to family pride. I could have just ripped it out and bought some shiny new model, but where's the fight in that? Instead, I decided to turn this petty little feud into something no one in this neighborhood would forget. I'm talking about flipping the script so hard Vivian won't know what hit her. But let me back up a bit. Before we get into the how and the what, you need to understand what this neighborhood really is. The houses may look pristine now, but there was a time when the community was just a few families, dirt roads, and a lot of heart. My dad was one of those original families. He poured sweat and soul into this place. I remember sitting on the porch with him, listening to the crickets and watching the sun set over the small lake at the end of our street. That lake was his escape, and the mailbox at the end of the driveway was his first handshake with the world every morning. For me, losing Dad made those moments feel like they belonged to someone else. So yeah, when Vivian told me my mailbox had to go, it wasn't just about rules or HOA bylaws. It was about losing a piece of my past, a piece of my family. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not saying I hate order. Rules have their place, but when rules start to erase the people who built the community, that's where I draw the line. That's why I started thinking, what if I could fight fire with something Vivian's never seen, something that'd make her stare, scratch her head, and maybe even stutter? What if my mailbox could talk back? You're probably thinking, talking mailbox? Come on, Michael. But trust me, I'm a bit of a tech geek. I've been tinkering with gadgets since I was a kid, and when someone tries to push me around, I push back. With style. So the plan started brewing, a mailbox that wasn't just a mailbox, one that would throw a little sass, a little irony, maybe even some robotic justice Vivian hadn't bargained for. But before I get ahead of myself, there's a lot more to this story. The petty complaints, the neighborhood whispers, the board meetings where Vivian flexed her power like a queen on her throne. And let me tell you, the way this HOA tried to strip me of my mailbox, that was just the beginning. The kind of fight that started over wood and nails quickly turned into a battle for dignity, respect, and who really calls the shots in this neighborhood. So, if you're ready for a story about standing up to bullies with brains and a little bit of humor, buckle up. This isn't your usual HOA tale. It's a tale of how one man turned a mailbox rebellion into a legend. And if you're watching from somewhere out there, hit that comment and let me know where you are, because wherever you are, remember, sometimes it's the little things that make the biggest difference. Stick around, because Vivian Miller and her cronies, they're about to find out they picked the wrong mailbox owner to mess with. The moment Vivian Miller's letter hit my mailbox, ironically enough, it was clear she wasn't going to let this go quietly. The letter wasn't a polite notice. It was a blunt command. Immediate removal required. Failure to comply will result in escalating fines and potential legal action. No wiggle room, no friendly neighborhood chat, just a cold, unyielding decree from the self-appointed queen of our street. I stared at that paper for a long moment, the weight of it sinking in. It wasn't just about wood and nails anymore. This was about power, about control. About a woman who wore her HOA presidency like a crown and wielded her rules like a weapon. So, I did what any reasonable guy would do. I picked up the phone and dialed her number. "Vivian," I said when she answered, "I got your letter about the mailbox. I want to understand what exactly is wrong with it." Her voice was clipped, her tone as sharp as ever. "Michael, your mailbox violates Section 4.3. Subsection B, regarding community aesthetic standards. We require uniformity to maintain property values. Your mailbox sticks out, and frankly, it's unacceptable." I swallowed the lump of frustration that built in my throat. It's been here for 50 years. My father built it with his own hands. It's part of this neighborhood's history. Can't we find a way to honor that? A pause, then her signature cool response. "Sentimentality doesn't override the rules. The mailbox must be removed immediately, or fines will begin accruing." I sighed. Of course, the rules were always more important than people's stories. But I wasn't about to cave in without a fight. I hung up and stepped outside to clear my head. Across the street, I spotted Vivian eyeing my mailbox like it was a personal insult. She had that look, part disdain, part smug satisfaction, as if she already thought she had me backed into a corner. That moment lit a fire inside me. If Vivian thought I was just going to rip down my dad's legacy because she threw a tantrum disguised as a policy, she was sorely mistaken. Over the next few days, I started to dig in. I pored over the HOA bylaws and neighborhood covenants, looking for anything that could give me a leg to stand on. I wasn't a lawyer, but I was persistent, and determination can often bridge the gap where knowledge lacks. At the same time, I began to quietly talk to my neighbors. I was careful not to make a scene. Vivian had eyes everywhere, but I needed to know if I was alone in feeling suffocated by these petty rules. One afternoon, I caught up with Mrs. Harper, a sweet lady who'd lived here longer than anyone. She confided in me, whispering like we were sharing a secret. "You know," she said, "Vivian fined me last year because my garden gnome wasn't approved. I told her it was my late husband's. She said, 'Rules are rules, Mrs. Harper. Sentiment doesn't matter.'" I nodded, feeling a pang of sympathy. It was clear Vivian wasn't interested in the community's history or heart. She was all about control. Meanwhile, the fines started rolling in, small at first but relentless, $50.00, then $75.00, and threatening to climb higher if I didn't comply. Every notice felt like a personal jab, an attempt to wear me down. I tried reaching out again to Vivian, hoping for some reason, some compromise. Her voice was colder this time. "Michael, the fines are justified. You may dispute them through legal channels if you believe otherwise." Legal channels? Now that was a challenge. I realized this wasn't just about a mailbox. It was a power struggle. Vivian wanted to prove she was in charge, and I was her latest target. But I wasn't the type to back down. The next few days saw more signs of pressure. Neighborhood emails circulated reminding residents about community standards. Small placards appeared in some yards, mailbox compliance enforced. It was an unspoken warning to anyone considering dissent. One afternoon, I caught Greg, one of Vivian's enforcers, giving my mailbox a dirty look. He muttered, "Setting a bad example." I met his gaze with a smirk that said, "You don't scare me." As the pressure mounted, I started to think bigger. What if I could turn this ridiculous feud into something they never saw coming? My mailbox was my dad's legacy, a symbol of family, history, and pride. If Vivian wanted to play the game of rules and control, I'd play too, but with a twist. That's when the idea hit me, a talking mailbox. Not just any mailbox, but a robot that could talk back, that could throw witty remarks, even call out Vivian's overreach in real time. I imagined it now, Vivian marching up to my mailbox, only to hear a robotic voice say, "Warning! Unapproved authority detected. Please adjust your attitude immediately." The thought cracked a smile across my face. I shared the idea with a few neighbors. Some laughed, some raised eyebrows, but most were intrigued. They were tired of being walked over, tired of petty rules strangling our community's spirit. So while Vivian sharpened her tools of fines and threats, I began building a new kind of defense, one that would be equal parts cheeky and clever. This wasn't just about winning a fight anymore. It was about sending a message. You don't get to erase my family's legacy or silence me. I started tinkering in my garage, pulling out old circuit boards, speakers, and microcontrollers. I sketched out plans for a mailbox that could detect visitors, respond to voices, and maybe even tell a joke or two. At the same time, I documented everything, the letters, the fines, every call with Vivian. If this was going to end up in court, I needed my facts straight. And I started organizing, quietly gathering signatures, talking to a few brave neighbors willing to stand up. The community might be scared, but they were ready to push back if someone led the way. Vivian had no idea what was coming. This fight wasn't just about a mailbox anymore. It was about control, legacy, dignity, and the right to say no to bullies dressed in power suits. As I stood in my driveway, looking at that crooked old mailbox that had survived decades of weather and wear, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Hope. Hope that a little ingenuity and a lot of guts could turn the tide. This was only the beginning. By the time I had the idea for a talking mailbox, this fight had already started to feel bigger than just me. It was no longer just a simple dispute over a piece of wood at the end of my driveway. It had quietly evolved into a neighborhood rebellion, simmering just below the surface of the manicured lawns and freshly trimmed hedges. I realized that what started as a personal stand against Vivian's heavy-handed rules could inspire others tired of her reign. I began cautiously sharing my idea with a few neighbors who I knew had been silently frustrated with the HOA's relentless micromanagement. At first they chuckled, "A talking mailbox? Seriously, Michael?" But when I laid out the plan, their laughter turned to curious smiles and nods of approval. Many of them had stories of their own about petty fines and rules that crushed their freedom to personalize their homes. They saw the mailbox not just as a box, but a symbol, a small spark that could ignite a bigger conversation. Mrs. Harper, the sweet woman whose beloved garden gnome Vivian once fined her for, was among the first to approach me with encouragement. "Michael," she said quietly one afternoon as we watered her flowers, "if you do this, if you fight back like that, you might just give us all hope." Her words stuck with me. I wasn't just defending my family's legacy anymore. I was holding a beacon for everyone feeling squeezed by an overbearing HOA. With that quiet support fueling me, I transformed my garage into a makeshift workshop. It wasn't glamorous. Wires spilled from drawers, old circuit boards littered the workbench, and tools of all kinds were scattered across every surface. But to me, this was a fortress of ingenuity. I wasn't just building a mailbox, I was engineering a statement. I scavenged old electronics, a microphone here, a small speaker there, some sensors from gadgets I'd repaired over the years. My goal was to craft a mailbox that wasn't silent, that could detect when someone approached, respond with voice, and most importantly, serve a little robotic justice. I wanted the mailbox to greet visitors politely, but throw a bit of shade at Vivian and her enforcers. A cheeky, unauthorized authority detected, "Vivian, please adjust your attitude." It was just the kind of message I envisioned to keep her off balance. Each evening, I'd plug away at the programming, writing witty responses, polite refusals, and even some jokes to lighten the mood. The mailbox had to have personality, something unexpected that would turn Vivian's rules into a punchline she couldn't control. And if it made her face flush red with frustration, well, that was just a bonus. Meanwhile, Vivian was far from idle. A few weeks after the first letter, I heard through a neighbor that she had called an emergency HOA board meeting specifically to discuss the Sanders mailbox situation. According to the gossip, Vivian was furious, branding me a community agitator and warning other residents not to follow my example. It was clear she was rattled, and that made me feel a surge of hope. I invited a small group of neighbors over one Saturday afternoon to see the prototype in action. The mailbox, with its wires and blinking lights exposed, looked more Frankenstein than polished, but when I powered it on and it greeted us with a robotic, "Welcome to the neighborhood, authorized visitors only, Vivian, please adjust your attitude," the group burst into laughter and applause. For many of them, it was the first time in months they felt they could openly defy Vivienne's grip, even if just through a talking mailbox. Word about the talking mailbox spread quickly. More neighbors whispered their own frustrations with the HOA, stories of fines for crooked shutters, letters demanding paint colors be changed, and warnings over lawn decorations. I began collecting these anecdotes not to stir trouble, but to highlight a growing community discontent. Vivian wasn't just targeting me, she was stifling the entire neighborhood's spirit. One evening, as I was busy programming a new snarky line, my phone buzzed with a message from a local community organizer who had caught wind of the story. She offered me invaluable advice: gather signatures, document every interaction, keep detailed records, and prepare for a possible legal challenge. The fight wasn't just about rebellion anymore. It was about strategy and legal savvy. Vivian's desperation became more apparent soon after. Another letter appeared on my door, this time a formal cease and desist, demanding the immediate removal of the talking mailbox on grounds that it caused a nuisance and violated community standards. Her tone had shifted from condescending to aggressive. The gloves were off. Determined not to let Vivian win by intimidation, I announced a neighborhood event I called the Mailbox Party. The goal was simple: to celebrate our resistance and bring the community together. Invitations went out quietly but purposefully. I wanted neighbors to see that standing up wasn't just possible, it was necessary. The day of the party arrived and my mailbox was the star attraction. It welcomed guests with cheeky greetings, delivered tongue-in-cheek warnings to Vivian, and even shared a few well-timed jokes that had people laughing and bonding. For the first time in a long time, the street felt alive, united against the oppressive rules. Vivian showed up, her eyes flashing with fury, but instead of the usual cold confrontation, she was met with warm smiles, laughter, and a surprising amount of solidarity. Neighbors who had once feared her now stood beside me, their quiet support transforming into vocal encouragement. Her attempts to shut down the event fell flat. The crowd was bigger than she expected, and their resolve was stronger than ever. The talking mailbox wasn't just a box anymore, it had become a rallying point, a symbol of the community's refusal to be silenced. The story caught fire beyond our street. Videos of the talking mailbox went viral online, inspiring people from other neighborhoods facing similar HOA battles. Suddenly, the little rebellion in our suburb had grown into a movement. Vivian's iron grip weakened as public opinion turned against her. The authority she once wielded like a sword was now questioned, mocked, and challenged at every turn. For me, the mailbox fight had become more than a battle over rules. It was a lesson in courage, creativity, and the power of community. With each sarcastic greeting and every neighbor's smile, I saw the spirit of this neighborhood, once buried under layers of red tape and fear, begin to shine again. And as I looked at that crooked, talking mailbox standing proudly by the curb, I knew one thing for certain: Vivian and her cronies had no idea what hit them. This was just the beginning of a new chapter, not just for me, but for everyone who dared to stand up. So where are you watching from right now? Drop your city or town in the comments. I want to see who's joining this fight from all over. And trust me, stick around, because these HOA bullies are about to get schooled like they've never been before. You won't want to miss what's coming next. The success of the Mailbox Party felt like a small but powerful victory. It wasn't just about my talking mailbox anymore. It had become a symbol of defiance, of neighbors quietly reclaiming their voices. But I knew better than to think Vivian Miller would simply step aside. If anything, that event had lit a fire under her. Within a week, the storm of pushback began to brew. The first sign came with more letters, not just to me but to neighbors who had attended the party or voiced their support. Each letter was carefully worded yet dripping with menace. Fines for property violations, warnings of legal consequences, and veiled threats of further action. It was Vivian's way of saying, "You think you can fight me? Think again." I wasn't surprised. If anything, I welcomed the challenge. But this time, I knew I needed more than a witty mailbox and grassroots support. I needed professional help. I tracked down a local attorney known for taking on tough HOA cases. She was straightforward and pragmatic, the the kind of person who doesn't mince words. HOAs love their power, but they have limits, she told me during our first meeting. You're not just fighting a mailbox issue, you're challenging the entire enforcement culture. It's going to take strategy, documentation, and patience. I laid out everything: the letters, the fines, the neighborhood's growing frustration, even the talking mailbox project. She listened carefully, nodding, already mapping a plan in her head. She helped me sift through the HOA bylaws and local ordinances. There were some surprising gaps. For instance, several community standards Vivian cited weren't formally adopted or were vaguely worded, leaving room for interpretation or misuse. Some fines were issued without proper notice or due process. These were my footholds. While I was digging into legal details, I ramped up organizing efforts within the neighborhood. I created flyers summarizing our situation and distributed them door to door, inviting neighbors to meetings to discuss their own grievances. We shared stories, some funny, some infuriating, about the absurd rules and arbitrary fines they'd endured. Mrs. Harper's garden gnome story became a favorite, a symbol of how personal histories and joys had been trampled in the name of uniformity. More neighbors stepped forward, their frustration palpable, but their voices gaining strength. Vivian was clearly feeling the heat. At the next HOA board meeting, which I attended alongside several supporters, she launched into a tirade. She accused me of stirring division, of undermining the community's values, and demanded the fines be upheld. Her words were sharp, but this time the room didn't fall silent in fear. Several neighbors spoke up, defending my mailbox and demanding a fair review of enforcement practices. The tension was thick. Vivian was losing her grip, but she wasn't finished. Behind the scenes, the intimidation ramped up. Yard inspections became relentless, even nitpicky. I heard whispers of HOA investigations into other neighbors who dared to show solidarity. Letters warning of non-compliance arrived for trivial issues. One night, I got a surprising call from Greg, one of Vivian's usual enforcers. His voice was less hostile than before. "Michael, they're not happy about all this. Be careful, yeah?" I smiled into the phone. "Greg, I'm not here to cause trouble, just making sure fairness gets its day." This was no longer a fight about a mailbox. It was about respect, fairness, and community. My lawyer advised me to prepare for a formal hearing, possibly even court if Vivian continued her overreach. But she stressed that our strongest asset was unity. Courts respected organized groups, not lone rebels. With that, I doubled down on community organizing. We drafted a petition calling for the suspension of my fines and for a thorough review of enforcement policies to ensure fairness and transparency. The petition gathered signatures quickly. Neighbors wanted change. Vivian responded with thinly veiled threats posted on the community bulletin board, warning of escalated legal action for non-compliance. But the mood had shifted. The community wasn't scared anymore. They were ready. The hearing day arrived with a mix of nerves and resolve. I stood before the HOA board. The same people who'd tried to silence me. Vivian sat with a cold, calculating expression, but this time, the room belonged to the neighbors who had come to support me. With my lawyer's help, I laid out our case: the arbitrary fines, inconsistent enforcement, lack of transparency, and the community's growing voice against bullying tactics. I shared testimonies from neighbors who had suffered under the board's heavy hand. Then, I unveiled my talking mailbox, the cheeky symbol that sparked this whole movement. The room was silent, then came murmurs of agreement. The board voted to suspend the fines against me and agreed to establish a committee with community representatives to review enforcement policies. It wasn't a total victory, but it was progress. Vivian didn't resign or back down, but her power was no longer absolute. Walking out of that hearing, I felt a weight lift. Not just mine, but the community's. We'd taken the first step toward reclaiming our neighborhood. And as I looked at my mailbox, crooked, a little worse for wear, but proudly standing, I knew that sometimes it's the smallest things that hold the greatest power. The victory at the HOA hearing gave the neighborhood a burst of hope, but Vivian Miller wasn't ready to relinquish her grip so easily. In fact, it felt like the setback only made her dig her claws in deeper. The day after the board voted to suspend my fines and agreed to review their enforcement policies, the subtle tensions I'd felt before erupted into a more tangible resistance. The first sign came quickly: Flyers appeared on doorsteps around the neighborhood, not the usual cheerful newsletters, but warnings, messages about disruptive elements threatening the harmony of the community. They didn't name me, but anyone paying attention knew who was the target. A few neighbors confided that they'd found anonymous notes slipped under their doors, veiled threats reminding them to stay in line or face consequences. Despite the mounting pressure, the talking mailbox, my little technological rebellion, only gained popularity. Kids on the block loved it, neighbors chuckled at its programmed jokes and sarcastic lines, especially those aimed at Vivian. I remember one sunny afternoon when the mailbox's robotic voice cracked through the quiet street. "Vivian, please adjust your attitude." I swear, I saw a group of neighbors smile wider that day than they had in months. This newfound attention pushed me to think bigger. The mailbox wasn't just a novelty anymore. It was becoming a beacon for those fed up with the HOA's heavy-handed tactics. So, I decided to throw a public unveiling, what I called the Mailbox Party. It was more than a celebration. It was a statement, a communal declaration that we wouldn't be intimidated anymore. Invitations went out quietly but purposefully. I reached out to neighbors I knew had suffered under Vivian's rule, as well as those who had kept their heads down but might be ready to join the cause. The turnout exceeded my expectations. On a crisp Saturday afternoon, my front yard filled with familiar faces, families, retirees, even a few who'd never spoken to me before. Phones and cameras appeared as people documented the event, capturing the mailbox's antics and the vibrant spirit buzzing through the crowd. The mailbox greeted guests with its usual cheeky personality, witty lines, playful warnings to Vivian, and humorous anecdotes that had everyone laughing. The atmosphere was electric. For many, it was the first time they felt truly connected, united by a common cause and a shared sense of rebellion. Then Vivian arrived. Her entrance was unmistakable. Flanked by a few board members, she walked up the street with that icy stare that had shut down more than a few conversations before. But this time, instead of silence and submission, she was met with something entirely different. The crowd greeted her with polite but firm resistance. A few neighbors stepped forward, making it clear they wouldn't be intimidated into silence. Vivian's lips pressed into a tight line as she tried to assert her authority. "This gathering violates several HOA policies," she declared, voice sharp as ever. "I demand this event be shut down immediately." I stepped up beside the mailbox, meeting her gaze. "We're celebrating community today, Vivian, not disrupting it. There's a difference." The crowd chuckled, and just then the mailbox's speaker buzzed alive, saying in its robotic tone, "Violation? Or just a new standard? Vivian, your move." Laughter broke out again, this time louder, more confident. The tension in the air shifted. Vivian looked around, realizing her usual tactics weren't working. She tried a few more threats about fines and legal action, but the community wasn't swayed. Local news crews showed up, attracted by the buzz. Reporters interviewed neighbors eager to share their stories, tales of petty fines, unreasonable rules, and now the growing hope sparked by our small rebellion. Videos of the talking mailbox and the lively gathering spread quickly online, inspiring others who felt similarly trapped by their own HOAs. The power dynamic had clearly shifted. Behind the scenes, I heard whispers of frustration within the HOA board. Emails leaked, revealing that some members questioned Vivian's aggressive stance. A few neighbors who had kept quiet before now spoke out publicly, emboldened by the momentum. Vivian, once so sure of her control, began to lose her grip. The cease and desist letters became less frequent, replaced by quieter attempts to negotiate and placate. For me, it was surreal. What started as a simple fight over a mailbox had turned into a movement. The neighborhood, once fractured by fear, was now coming together, stronger and more confident. At night, I'd sit on my porch, watching the blinking lights of the mailbox at the curb, programmed to greet every passerby with a bit of programmed sass. It was more than a gadget, it was a symbol of what could happen when people refused to be silenced. Neighbors started questioning other petty HOA rules, challenging fines that had gone unaddressed for years, and supporting each other in ways I hadn't seen before. The spirit of community was alive again, beating back against the cold bureaucracy that had tried to smother it. Vivian and her cronies might have held the official power, but the real strength belonged to the people. And sometimes it just takes a little creativity and a talking mailbox to remind everyone of that. All right, I want to know, where are you watching from right now? Drop your city or town in the comments, and trust me, you'll want to stick around because these HOA bullies are about to learn the hard way that messing with the wrong mailbox owner is a mistake they'll regret. Don't blink, the best is yet to come. The aftermath of the mailbox party and the viral buzz it created wasn't just a fleeting moment of glory. It marked a turning point that rippled through our neighborhood in ways I hadn't fully anticipated. The community felt different now, almost electric with a newfound confidence. People who'd long been silenced or intimidated by Vivian's rigid rules were speaking up, sharing their stories and pushing back. The tiny rebellion had blossomed into a movement, and I was suddenly at the center of it all. But change, as I quickly learned, isn't a tidy process. Vivian Miller, despite the setbacks, wasn't ready to concede her authority. If anything, she became more determined to hold on to control, though with a thinner veneer of charm and a sharper edge. After the HOA board hearing where fines against me were suspended and the promise was made to review enforcement policies, a community committee was formed. I was invited to join, no longer just the mailbox rebel, but a representative for our neighborhood's voice. That committee room was a strange place. Rows of folding chairs filled with people who had spent years tiptoeing around Vivian's authority, now animated with opinions, hopes, and grievances. The air was thick with a mix of relief and tension, the kind that comes from years of pent-up frustration finally being voiced. Vivian was there too, sitting stiffly near the front, her sharp eyes surveying the room. The once impenetrable aura she carried had softened, but a hint of steel remained. She understood that the neighborhood was shifting, but giving up wasn't in her nature. Our meetings became a back and forth of ideas, objections, and negotiations. Vivian pushed for strict adherence to uniform standards, warning of slippery slopes if enforcement became too lenient. Many of us, myself included, argued for flexibility, for rules that respected personal histories, unique expressions, and above all, fairness. Neighbors shared stories that broke my heart, like Mrs. Harper's tale about her garden gnome, which Vivian had fined her for not removing. "It was my husband's favorite," Mrs. Harper had told the group, voice trembling. "A little piece of him lives in that gnome." That moment softened even Vivian's stern expression, a rare glimpse beneath her rigid exterior. I watched as walls slowly came down. Neighbors, who rarely spoke, began voicing their opinions, and the community found its voice again. Outside the committee room, changes started to ripple. Neighbors began challenging fines with newfound confidence, supported by the clearer guidelines we helped shape. Petty rules that once went unquestioned were being reconsidered. The neighborhood, once stifled by fear, felt alive again. The talking mailbox continued its reign as a neighborhood fixture, its blinking lights and cheeky voice a reminder that defiance could be both clever and light-hearted. Kids played nearby, neighbors smiled as it greeted visitors with its programmed sass, and even some of Vivian's supporters couldn't help but chuckle at its antics. One afternoon, Vivian surprised me. She came to my porch, unannounced. I braced myself for confrontation. Instead, she said quietly, "Michael, I want to acknowledge what you've done here. It's changed the neighborhood, and me. I see now that leadership isn't about control, it's about community." Her admission caught me off guard. The woman who had once been my fiercest opponent was showing humility. I extended my hand. "We're all here because we want this neighborhood to feel like home. That means listening, adapting, and respecting each other." She shook my hand firmly, a silent truce forming between us. That handshake wasn't just about peace, it symbolized a shift in power, a move from division toward partnership. Looking back, the fight over the mailbox was never just about a box. It was about standing up when no one else would, about reminding a community of its strength and dignity. It was about transforming fear into unity. At night, when I sat on my porch watching the mailbox's glow flicker softly in the dark, I felt a quiet pride. We had changed the narrative, from one of control and oppression to one of resilience and hope. Challenges would come, no doubt, but the neighborhood had awakened and we were ready. Vivian Miller might have held the title of HOA president, but the true heart of this neighborhood belonged to its people. And sometimes it takes a little creativity, a lot of courage, and yes, even a talking mailbox to remind us of that. The transformation of our neighborhood didn't happen overnight, but once the first cracks appeared in Vivian Miller's rigid control, the floodgates began to open. The mailbox that once stood as a simple wooden box at the edge of my driveway had grown into a powerful symbol of community resilience and hope. Its blinking lights and cheeky robotic greetings weren't just entertaining quirks anymore. They had become a beacon for neighbors to rally around, a reminder that the rules didn't have to mean silence or submission. It was incredible to witness the shift. People who had once dreaded HOA letters began opening them with wary curiosity instead of dread. Neighbors who rarely spoke beyond polite nods now shared stories, grievances, and laughter at block gatherings. The tight-knit but quiet community I'd known was waking up, breathing life into streets that had long been subdued by fear. One evening, I found myself sitting on my porch, watching the mailbox flicker in the fading light. The gentle glow felt like a pulse, a heartbeat of this renewed neighborhood spirit. Kids walked past, waving at the mailbox as if it were an old friend. Adults stopped to chat, exchanging news and smiles. I thought back to my dad, who had built that mailbox decades ago. For him, it was more than a utility. It was a handshake with the world, a first impression of home. Now, in its new form, it was doing even more, connecting people, empowering voices, and breaking down walls that had separated us for too long. The fight with Vivian Miller had changed all of us. She was still around, still holding the title of HOA president, but her once unshakable authority had eroded. The community committee we'd helped establish met regularly, with neighbors weighing in on policies, sharing feedback, and ensuring fairness. Vivian was quieter in meetings, listening more, demanding less. It was clear she realized that leadership wasn't about control or fear. It was about partnership and respect. Yet, old habits die slowly. Vivian sometimes pushed back, proposing strict interpretations of rules or trying to enforce certain policies with a heavy hand. But the community now had a voice, a united front, and the strength to push back. Our conversations in committee weren't battles anymore. They were dialogues, sometimes spirited but productive. One day I spotted Vivian tending the community garden, an area she had long ignored. Curious, I walked over. "Vivian," I said, "you've done a great job here." She looked up, surprised but pleased. "Thank you, Michael. I guess even I can learn new things." We talked for a while, not as adversaries but as neighbors. She admitted the fight over the mailbox had opened her eyes to how disconnected the board had become from the people they represented. She spoke of wanting to rebuild trust, and I shared how important it was to listen and adapt. That conversation was a small but significant step toward healing. Beyond policy and HOA politics, the mailbox's legacy spread. I began helping neighbors with small projects, fixing fences, repainting shutters, or just offering advice on how to deal with the HOA's paperwork. It was a way of giving back and reinforcing the bonds that had been strained but not broken. The talking mailbox itself became a beloved fixture. I upgraded it with new features. It could recognize familiar faces, greet neighbors by name, even play recorded messages for holidays or neighborhood events. Kids loved interacting with it, and even the skeptics had to admit it brought a spark of joy to the street. One chilly autumn evening during a community potluck, Mrs. Harper raised her glass. "To the mailbox that talked back and the neighborhood that found its voice," she toasted, her eyes glistening. And to Michael, who reminded us all that sometimes the smallest sparks can start the biggest fires. Applause filled the air. I looked around, feeling the weight and warmth of that moment. This fight was never really about rules or mailboxes. It was about people, about dignity, respect, and standing together. And that's the story I want to leave with you. If you're watching this, caught in your own battle with an overbearing HOA or any system that seems too big to fight, remember this: change starts small. It starts with one person daring to say, enough. It grows when neighbors stand side by side, and sometimes it takes a little creativity, maybe even a talking mailbox, to make people listen. So wherever you are, whatever you're facing, I encourage you to keep going. Learn the rules, know your rights, and find your allies. And when the time is right, don't be afraid to speak up. Think outside the box and fight for the home and community you deserve. And if you're watching this while dealing with your own HOA headache or feeling powerless against a rigid system, drop a comment below telling me where you're from and what you're facing. Sharing your story might be the first step toward your own victory. Remember, sometimes the smallest acts of rebellion lead to the greatest change. Stay patient, stay clever, and keep fighting the good fight. Because your community, your dignity, and your legacy are worth it.